This is a follow-up to the Traktor beatgridding tutorial. In that tutorial, I focused exclusively on house music. House music and hip-hop are probably the easiest forms of electronic dance music to beatgrid in Traktor because they have a very obvious and very consistent time signature and beat pattern. So the time signature and the beat pattern are exactly what you expect just about every time, and it makes it very easy to see where the beats are supposed to be, line everything up perfectly. So I want to cover a couple of other styles of electronic dance music that might be a little bit more challenging to beatgrid, particularly drum and bass and dubstep. So those are the two styles that we'll work with in this video. The truth is that these styles are actually following very similar rules to what you get in house music. In other words, they are very consistent in terms of their time signature and in terms of their beat pattern. Those beat patterns, however, are different from the beat pattern in house music. The time signature is actually the same. Time signature is 4/4 in most drum and bass and dubstep, just as it is in most house music. However, the beat pattern is much different, so the 1 isn't always exactly where you expect it if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the difference between the two is really the beat pattern and not the time signature. Drum and bass and dubstep are heavily syncopated, which means that the 1 is just not where you're going to expect it to be sometimes, because they're rushing ahead of the beat or they're dropping behind the beat in ways to give it a very different kind of a swing sound that you don't get in house music, that you don't get in what they call 4-on-the-floor music, where the 1, 2, 3, and 4 are always in the same place. Sometimes Traktor grids these tracks incorrectly because Traktor's expecting the 1 in the wrong place, or it's looking at the overall pattern and it's just finding a very different BPM than what you actually think the BPM is. With drum and bass, your BPM is going to be roughly between 160 and 200. With dubstep, your BPM is going to be right around 140. Somewhere between 130 and 150 is common, but 140, almost 140 on the nose actually, is probably the most common BPM that you'll find in dubstep. So if you're just guessing with a track, throw in 140 and see where it goes from there. With drum and bass, often you get something like this. Here this track is a drum and bass track, and I had Traktor analyze it, and it came out at 116.46. Now we know that's wrong. There's no way it's going to be that speed, so let's listen.
Who spurs the beast, the corpse will ride.
Now, the first problem that you can see here with trying to beatgrid this track is, as you're listening, the only drum pattern that you're hearing in the beginning is this one hi-hat sound.
When Satan questioned,
even well into the track, that's the only beat that you've got. It's not till here, where the track is just already going crazy, that you're actually getting the drum and bass pattern you really expect. But the beginning of this track is simply a hi-hat. But that hi-hat is enough for us to start gridding the track. So let's start. We know the 1 is off here. The 1 should be right on that beginning. So we're gonna hit the delete key, which is this button with the little trash can icon on it, and we're gonna move to the very beginning of the track. And right there is where that hi-hat comes in. Click the beat grid marker, so your first grid point is right there, and go from there. Now clearly, it's wildly off still. If you look visually, you can see that the next hi-hat sound is right here. And yet, you know, we're way over here. So we can change that pretty easily by clicking here and dragging. Now when you do this, you're moving the beat by 0.1. Okay, the BPM, I mean. You're moving the BPM by 0.1. So see, that's that 0.100. The 0.1 is what's moving there, is what's changing. You get finer tune as you hold down the control key and then click these two buttons here, the widen or the shrink the grid the grid here, and you can see it's moving by 0.01 rather than 0.1. So you're getting finer and finer, and then as you get to the end of the track, you're just going to use it without the control key, and you're clicking it by 0.001 at a time. Now the next step is to get the beat grid to line up with the hi-hats. So as we're listening to the hi-hats and we see that they're there, use both your ears and your eyes, you know, both visually and, you know, with the sound, you want to get these things to line up. So I'm going to use wide changes at the beginning, and visually that looks all right.
who spurs the beast, the corpse
I can see it's starting to fall off already a little bit, so I can go ahead and make another adjustment there. And I'm getting closer That's actually sounding pretty good right now. The other thing to watch, now my visual cues are gone. There's not much going on here, but I can watch at least this beat counter, and of course I can listen to the tick in the headphones, which is going to give you a tick as every time the beat changes. Alright, now with this part, there's no visual cues, there's no audio cues. You really don't know where the beat is at this point until it starts to come back. And now it's coming back with these nice, fat visual cues for us too. And you know what? It's still looking very much on beat. And it's sounding on beat. Now it's hard to tell if the beat is changing much here, because you have such different beats. This is just a hi-hat, and of course that has all the drums. So let's try, at the end we've got hi-hats too. There's a little bit of a change there. Not much though.
When Satan questioned,
yeah, I would just nudge this over maybe a little.
whence blows
that sounds a lot better. And of course, if you follow the middle, perfect. Now, of course, this is half the size that I wanted. I want this BPM to be double that, but I can just click the X2 here. And there you have it. Now, a nice thing about Traktor is you can actually MIDI map the X2 and divide it by 2 keys, so that if you want to mix this drum and bass track into hip hop, you can drop it down to 87.36, and you can times 2 it to 174 when you need to mix it with more drum and bass. So the grids are really flexible that way, and if you MIDI map those two things to buttons, you can actually do that on the fly. So this track is beat gridded. I can now click the lock key, and I'm done with that one. Okay, let's try this next track here. This, you can see the tempo is right. I mean, the tempo is roughly where, you know, it should be, but the grid is off. My guess is Traktor's trying to figure out, based on when there's more action in the song, where the 1 might be. But like I said, with drum and bass, it sometimes gets that wrong, so you want to listen for it. Now, see, that's where I would put the 1. Right on that bass drum. And, you know, that's usually a good cue. You want to listen for the first kick. The first kick is usually where you want to mark your 1. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and start the grid right there. Notice that I didn't have to adjust anything else. The grid is perfect, and it can now mix in the right place with something else. So Traktor is often, and you know, I didn't grid that track before. That was Traktor's analysis. Traktor got the BPM exactly right. Although again, you know, it's halved rather than, you know, it should be right about 175 here. Traktor got the BPM exactly right. But what it got wrong is where the 1 is. Now, I put the 1 here late in the song. Now you say, well, what if I want to mix earlier in the song? Well, you just mix earlier in the song. Now, one thing that happens, though, is you can no longer trust this to count 1, 2, 3, 4 for you. It's actually going to count, oops, it's actually going to count 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. So just put 1 at the 4 if it's coming before the before this grid marker here. 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So just count in your head when it's going 4, 3, 2, 1 as if it's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll make it a little easier to match things up as you're, you know, trying to match it to another track, especially if you start before this first grid marker. Okay, let's try some. I'm going to go ahead and lock that now, and I'm locking it at 87 once again rather than at 175. Now let's try a dubstep track. Okay, again, I can already see that there's probably something wrong with the place that Traktor puts the first downbeat. I'm actually going to want this to be the first downbeat right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to move the 1, but of course there's another problem here, which is this is coming in at 105 when it should be around 140. If you want to figure out why Traktor does this, just look at the pattern. Okay, those grid markers are mostly lining up with the highest volume points in the song, with those beats. But again, because it's heavily syncopated, Traktor doesn't know exactly where it thinks the 1 is, and so it's laying a very different pattern over the pattern that's here. So when you move around like that, it's not as obvious that the beat is completely off. So first of all, let's go ahead and move the 1 to where we want it, and we'll move it there. And now you can see much easier that the beat is off because it's not quite as lining up quite as often, although it's still lining up with some of those beats. Again, we know this is about 140. I can just type in 140 here to make my life easier, and hit that, and then boom. You know, this is pretty good. I mean, that was ridiculously easy. I just typed in 140 and it was right on the right spot. So sometimes, you know, actually a lot of the time, your dubstep tracks are exactly at 140 BPM. So you might want to just try that first if you're having problems, you know, beat gridding any kind of dubstep tracks.
Activity is increasing and Dick is on the rise. By executive order, we're on the manhunt aboard the Starship Enterprise. The once all-powerful ruler of Iraq was found in a hole. President Clinton fucked it. True.